The axe blade glinted in the harsh afternoon sun as it came down crooked, splitting the wood unevenly while the woman's torn calico dress caught on the rough bark of the woodpile. Rose Mayfield wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her pale cheek as she surveyed the meager pile of firewood she had managed to accumulate in the past 2 hours. The fabric of her dress, once a cheerful pattern of blue flowers, now hung in tatters around her ankles, ripped from her desperate flight through the brambles 3 days prior, when she had escaped her uncle's house in the dead of night. Her arms ached with a deep, burning pain that made each swing of the borrowed axe feel like lifting a boulder. But the November chill in the northern California mountains demanded fire, and fire demanded wood. She had found the abandoned cabin purely by chance, stumbling through the dense forest outside Willits, California in 1878, half-starved and delirious with exhaustion. The structure had clearly been empty for months, perhaps even a year, with dust coating every surface and cobwebs draping the corners like ghostly curtains. But it had a roof that kept out the rain and walls that blocked the wind, and that was more than Rose had possessed since running away from the only family she had left in the world. Her Uncle Benjamin had made it clear that he expected repayment for housing his dead sister's daughter, and the way his eyes had begun to linger on her as she turned 18 made Rose's skin crawl with a revulsion she could taste like copper in her mouth. So she had run with nothing but the dress on her back and $2 silver stolen from the kitchen jar, and now here she stood, 18 years old and utterly alone, trying to chop enough wood to survive the approaching winter. The axe handle had already raised blisters on her soft palms, blisters that had burst and bled and were now forming calluses, but she could not stop. Without fire, she would freeze when the true cold descended from the mountains. Rose positioned another log on the stump she was using as a chopping block, raising the axe high above her head with trembling arms. She brought it down with all the strength she could muster, but the blade struck at an angle and the axe head twisted in her grip, nearly flying from her hands entirely. A sob of frustration escaped her throat as she steadied herself, blinking back tears that she refused to let fall. Crying would solve nothing. Crying would not keep her warm or put food in her belly or protect her from whatever dangers lurked in these woods. She was so focused on her task, so consumed by exhaustion and determination, that she did not hear the horse approaching until it was nearly upon her. The sound of hooves on the dirt trail made her spin around with a gasp, the axe raised defensively in front of her like a weapon, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The man sitting astride the dappled gray mare held up both hands in a peaceful gesture, his brown eyes widening slightly at the sight of the desperate woman with wild auburn hair and a torn dress brandishing an axe at him like she meant to use it. He was tall even while seated, with broad shoulders straining against a worn leather jacket, and a weathered cowboy hat shading a face that looked to be in his mid-20s. A dark beard covered his strong jaw, and despite the peaceful gesture, there was something undeniably commanding about his presence. "Easy now," he said in a deep voice that carried the slow drawl of someone who had spent years working cattle under the open sky. "I am not here to cause you any harm, miss." Rose kept the axe raised, her blue eyes darting from the man to the trail behind him, searching for any sign of accomplices or threats. "Stay back," she warned, and hated how her voice trembled despite her attempt at bravery. "This is my cabin." The man's eyes moved from her face to the dilapidated structure behind her, then to the pathetically small pile of wood, and finally to her torn dress and blistered hands. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes that might have been pity or concern or both. "Your cabin," he repeated slowly, and she could not tell if he believed her or was merely humoring her. "I apologize for the intrusion, miss. I was riding the property line for the ranch I work at when I saw smoke from your chimney yesterday. We do not get many folks settling out this way anymore, so I thought I would check to see if everything was all right." "Everything is fine," Rose lied through her teeth, her arms beginning to shake from holding the heavy axe aloft. "You can go now." He made no move to leave, instead swinging his leg over the saddle and dismounting with the easy grace of someone who had spent more time on horseback than on foot. Rose took an instinctive step backward, tightening her grip on the axe handle until her knuckles turned white. The man stood a respectful distance away, his hand still visible and empty of weapons, though she could see a rifle strapped to his saddle and a revolver holstered at his hip. "My name is Vincent Morrison," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of courtesy that seemed almost absurdly formal given the circumstances. "I work as a ranch hand at the Copper Creek Ranch about 5 miles east of here. This cabin belonged to old Thomas Winters, who died last spring. His family back east has not yet decided what to do with the property." Rose's stomach dropped at this information. Her worst fear confirmed that she was indeed trespassing on land that did not belong to her. But she lifted her chin defiantly, refusing to show weakness even as panic clawed at her insides. "Are you here to make me leave?" Vincent Morrison studied her for a long moment, his brown eyes taking in every detail of her appearance with an intensity that made her want to squirm. She was acutely aware of how she must look, filthy and ragged and half wild, like some kind of feral creature that had wandered down from the mountains. But instead of disgust or judgment, she saw only that same troubling concern in his expression. "No, miss," he said finally. "I am not here to make you leave, but I would like to know your name and your situation, if you are willing to share it." Rose hesitated, weighing the risks of honesty against the potential benefits of having at least one person in this wilderness know she existed. If she disappeared or died out here alone, no one would ever know what had become of her. That thought was somehow more terrifying than the danger this stranger might represent. "Rose," she said after a long pause, not offering her surname. "Rose is my name." "Rose," he repeated, and the way he said it was gentle, almost respectful. "That is a pretty name. Rose, I do not mean to pry into your business, but it is clear that you are out here alone and in some difficulty. That dress looks like it has seen better days. You are trying to chop wood with a technique that is going to get you injured, and I would wager you have not had a proper meal in days." The accuracy of his assessment stung worse than any insult could have. Rose felt her face flush with shame, her eyes burning with tears she absolutely refused to shed in front of this stranger. "I am managing just fine on my own, thank you very much." "I can see that," Vincent said, and there was no mockery in his tone, only a quiet kindness that somehow made everything worse. "But managing just fine and being truly all right are two different things. Winter comes hard and fast in these mountains, Rose. Without proper firewood stores and adequate food supplies, you will not make it to spring." "I will figure it out," she insisted stubbornly, even though she had no idea how she would possibly survive the coming months. Vincent nodded slowly, as if considering her words, then his eyes moved to the axe still clutched in her trembling hands and the crooked pile of poorly split wood behind her. "That is a mighty heavy axe for someone your size," he observed. "And you are holding it wrong, which is why it keeps twisting in your grip. You are also exhausting yourself 3 times as fast as necessary by using your arms instead of your back and shoulders." Rose lowered the axe slightly, her curiosity overcoming her fear and pride. "I am doing the best I can with what I know." "I can see that too," Vincent said. He took a careful step forward, moving slowly as if approaching a skittish horse. "Rose, I have a proposition for you if you will hear me out." Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to send him away and maintain her fierce independence even if it killed her. But the rational part of her mind, the part that was terrified and exhausted and barely holding on, made her nod reluctantly. "I am listening." Vincent gestured toward the woodpile and the axe. "Let me chop that wood for you. I can do in an hour what would take you all day, and I can show you the proper technique so you can do it yourself when I am gone. In exchange, all I ask is that you do not work yourself to death trying to prove something to nobody but the trees." Rose stared at him, searching his face for any sign of ulterior motive or hidden agenda. Men did not help women for free, not in her experience. There was always a price, always some expectation of payment that made her skin crawl. "What do you really want?" she asked bluntly. "Men do not offer help without expecting something in return." Something dark flickered across Vincent's features, a shadow of anger or pain that was there and gone so quickly she almost thought she had imagined it. "Not all men are the same, Rose," he said quietly. "Some of us were raised to believe that you help people who need helping, especially when they are too proud to ask for it themselves." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe that there were still good people in the world, people who did not view her as property or commodity or something to be used and discarded. But trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. "I do not need charity," she said, her voice sharp with defensive pride. "It is not charity," Vincent countered. "Think of it as being neighborly. Out here, folks need to look out for each other or none of us survive. Today I help you with your wood, tomorrow maybe you help someone else who needs it. That is just how things work in this country." Rose bit her lower lip, torn between suspicion and desperate need. The pile of wood she had managed to chop would barely last a week, and her hands were so raw and blistered that the thought of swinging that axe even one more time made her want to weep. Finally, slowly, she lowered the axe to her side and nodded. "All right," she agreed reluctantly. "You can chop the wood, but I am watching you, and if you try anything untoward, I will split your skull with this axe." To her surprise, Vincent smiled, a genuine expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes and revealed straight white teeth. "That is fair enough. I would expect nothing less from a woman brave enough to survive out here on her own." He removed his leather jacket, hanging it carefully over his saddle, and rolled up the sleeves of his cotton work shirt to reveal forearms corded with muscle and tanned dark from years working in the sun. Rose stepped back, still clutching the axe handle tightly, as Vincent approached the chopping block and surveyed the available wood with a practiced eye. "You mind if I use my own axe?" he asked, gesturing toward a larger, sharper tool strapped to his saddle. "It is better weighted for this kind of work." Rose nodded her permission, watching warily as he retrieved the axe and tested its weight in his hands with the easy familiarity of someone who had done this task 1,000 times before. He selected a log from the pile, positioned it on the stump, and raised the axe high above his head. The blade came down in a perfect arc, the motion fluid and controlled, and the log split cleanly in two with a satisfying crack that echoed through the clearing. He worked with a rhythm and efficiency that was almost mesmerizing to watch, each swing precise and powerful, each log splitting cleanly without wasted effort. Within minutes, he had processed more wood than Rose had managed in hours, and he showed no signs of slowing down. Sweat began to darken his shirt between his shoulder blades, and he paused only occasionally to wipe his brow or reposition the logs. Rose found herself relaxing slightly as she watched him work, the tension slowly draining from her shoulders as it became clear that he meant exactly what he said. He was not here to hurt her or force himself upon her or demand anything beyond what he had explicitly stated. He was simply chopping wood because she needed it chopped, and he had the skill to do it efficiently. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked after a while, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. Vincent paused mid-swing, lowering the axe and turning to look at her with those steady brown eyes. "Because you need help," he said simply. "And because I know what it is like to be alone and struggling and too proud to ask for what you need." There was a story there, Rose could tell, some pain or hardship in his past that informed his actions now. But she did not press for details, respecting his privacy as she hoped he would respect hers. They fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by the rhythmic thwack of the axe blade biting into wood and the occasional chirping of birds in the surrounding trees. The pile of split firewood grew steadily larger, enough to last weeks if she rationed it properly, and Rose felt some of the crushing weight of anxiety lift from her chest. When the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Vincent finally set down the axe and surveyed his work with satisfaction. He had not only split all the available logs, but had also stacked the wood in a neat cord against the side of the cabin where it would stay dry and accessible. It was more wood than Rose could have processed in a month on her own, and the sight of it brought tears of relief to her eyes. "That should keep you warm for a good while," Vincent said, rolling down his sleeves and retrieving his jacket from the saddle. "But you are going to need more before winter truly sets in. These mountains get snow that can pile up 6 feet deep and temperatures that will freeze water solid overnight." Rose swallowed hard, trying not to show her terror at this information. She had known winter would be difficult, but she had not fully understood the reality of mountain winters in Northern California. "I will manage," she said automatically, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Vincent studied her for a long moment, and she could see him wrestling with something, some decision or internal debate playing out behind his eyes. Finally, he seemed to come to a conclusion, his jaw setting with determination. "Rose, I am going to say something, and I want you to hear me out before you refuse," he began carefully. "This cabin is going to be barely habitable once the real cold sets in. The roof has holes that will let in snow, the walls have gaps that will let in wind, and you do not have nearly enough provisions to last until spring. You can stay here and likely die of cold or starvation before February, or you can accept my help." "I told you I do not need charity," Rose started to protest, but Vincent held up a hand to stop her. "It is not charity," he said firmly. "It is a practical arrangement that benefits both of us. I have my own cabin about 2 miles from here, a place I built myself 3 years ago when I started working at Copper Creek Ranch. It is solid and weatherproof, with a good stove and enough room for 2 people to live without being on top of each other. I am gone most days working the ranch, and I could use someone to maintain the fire, prepare meals, and keep the place in order. You would have shelter, warmth, and safety, and I would have someone making sure my home does not fall into disrepair while I am working." Rose stared at him as if he had just suggested she sprout wings and fly to the moon. "You want me to live in your cabin? With you? Alone?" "I know how it sounds," Vincent said quickly. "And I know you have no reason to trust me, but I am offering you a chance to survive the winter, Rose. Nothing more, nothing less. You would have your own space, your own privacy, and I swear on my mother's grave that I would never lay a hand on you without your explicit permission and desire." It was possibly the most insane proposition Rose had ever heard, and yet some part of her recognized the brutal logic of it. She could not survive here alone, not really. She had been barely surviving for the past 3 days, and that was before winter had truly arrived. This man, this stranger named Vincent Morrison, was offering her a lifeline, and she would be a fool to refuse it purely out of pride or propriety. But agreeing to live alone with an unmarried man would ruin what little remained of her reputation, mark her as a fallen woman in the eyes of respectable society. Not that she had much reputation left to lose after running away from her uncle's house in the middle of the night, she supposed. "I do not even know you," she whispered, voicing her fear aloud. "You do not," Vincent agreed. "But you have seen me keep my word today. I said I would chop your wood and expect nothing in return, and I did exactly that. I am asking you to have enough faith to give me a chance to prove that I am a man of honor, Rose. That is all." Rose looked from his earnest face to the pile of neatly stacked firewood to the dilapidated cabin that would likely collapse under the first heavy snowfall. She thought about her Uncle Benjamin and his wandering hands, about the cold and hunger and loneliness of the past 3 days, about the very real possibility that she would not survive to see spring if she continued on her current path. "All right," she heard herself say, the word escaping before her rational mind could stop it. "I will come stay at your cabin, but only until spring, and only if you truly mean what you say about not expecting anything improper from me." The relief that washed over Vincent's features was so genuine and unguarded that it eased some of Rose's lingering fears. "I mean every word," he said solemnly. "You have my oath on that, Rose." He helped her gather the few meager possessions she had accumulated in the abandoned cabin, which amounted to little more than a threadbare blanket and a dented tin cup she had found in one of the cupboards. She cast one last look at the structure that had sheltered her for 3 days, feeling a strange pang of loss despite its inadequacy, and then allowed Vincent to help her up onto his horse. She sat in front of him, acutely aware of his solid presence behind her, and the way his arms came around her on either side to hold the reins. It was the closest she had been to a man in months, and her body tensed instinctively, prepared to fight or flee at the first sign of danger. But Vincent simply clicked his tongue and urged the horse into a gentle walk, maintaining a respectful distance as much as was possible while sharing a saddle. They rode through the forest as the sun sank lower, casting long shadows through the towering pines and redwoods. The temperature dropped noticeably as daylight faded, and Rose was grateful for the warmth radiating from Vincent's body at her back, even as she remained wary of his proximity. He did not speak during the ride, seeming to sense that she needed time to process the enormous decision she had just made. When his cabin came into view through the trees, Rose felt her anxiety spike again, her breath catching in her throat as reality crashed over her like a wave. She was about to live alone with a strange man, dependent on his goodwill and honor for her very survival. If he proved to be less honorable than he claimed, she would have nowhere to run, no one to call for help, nothing but her wits and determination to protect her. But as they approached the structure, Rose found herself surprised by what she saw. It was not a grand building by any means, but it was solid and well constructed, with a stone chimney rising from one end and real glass windows reflecting the dying light. Smoke curled from the chimney, suggesting that Vincent had built up the fire before leaving that morning, and a small corral nearby housed 2 more horses that whinnied a greeting to Vincent's mare. Vincent dismounted first, then reached up to help Rose down, his hands steadying her waist only until her feet touched the ground before he immediately stepped back, respecting her personal space. "Welcome to your new home, at least for the winter," he said, gesturing toward the cabin. "It is not much, but it is warm and dry and safe." Rose approached the door slowly, half convinced that she was making the biggest mistake of her life. But when Vincent pushed it open and gestured for her to enter first, she found her fears easing slightly. The interior was simple but clean, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall, a sturdy wooden table and chairs in the center, and a kitchen area with a proper cast iron stove and shelves stocked with supplies. A single bed occupied one corner, covered with thick wool blankets and furs, and Rose felt her face flush as she realized there was only one sleeping area. Vincent must have noticed her reaction because he quickly spoke up. "You will take the bed. I have been meaning to build a second sleeping platform in the loft space up there anyway, so this gives me motivation to finally do it. Until then, I am perfectly comfortable on the floor by the fire." Rose turned to look at him, searching his face once again for any sign of deception or hidden agenda, but she found only that same steady honesty she had seen all afternoon. "You would give up your bed for me, of course," Vincent said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You are my guest, Rose. And more than that, you are a woman in need of safety and comfort. What kind of man would I be if I did not offer you the best I have?" She had no answer to that, so she simply nodded and moved further into the cabin, taking in every detail of her new temporary home. It was infinitely better than the abandoned structure she had been squatting in, better than anything she had dared hope for when she fled her uncle's house. There was food here, real food that she could see stocked in the pantry, and warmth from the fire that already burned in the hearth, and a roof that looked like it could withstand any storm. "Are you hungry?" Vincent asked, moving toward the kitchen area. "I am not much of a cook, but I can manage a decent stew, and I think we have some bread left from the batch I bought in town last week." Rose's stomach answered for her, growling so loudly that she pressed a hand to it in embarrassment. She could not remember the last time she had eaten a full meal, having survived the past 3 days on wild berries and water from the stream. Vincent smiled at the sound, but it was not mocking, only sympathetic. "Stew it is then. Why do not you sit by the fire and warm up while I get it started? You look like you are half frozen." Rose wanted to offer to help, some ingrained sense of feminine duty telling her that she should be the one preparing the meal, but her exhaustion was so profound that she could barely stand upright. She sank into one of the wooden chairs by the fire, extending her blistered hands toward the warmth, and watched as Vincent moved efficiently around the kitchen, pulling out ingredients and setting a large pot on the stove. He worked in comfortable silence, and Rose found herself studying him more closely now that some of her initial terror had subsided. He was a handsome man. She could admit that objectively, with strong features and a physical presence that spoke of hard work and outdoor living. But more than his appearance, there was something inherently decent about him, a quiet integrity that showed in his actions more than his words. "How long have you worked at Copper Creek Ranch?" she asked, partly out of curiosity and partly to break the silence that had stretched between them. "About 4 years now," Vincent answered, stirring the pot as the stew began to bubble. "I came out to California from Wyoming in 1874, looking for work and a fresh start. The ranch owner, Samuel Harper, took a chance on me even though I was young and relatively inexperienced. I have been here ever since, working my way up from stable hand to full ranch hand." "What brought you to California?" Rose asked, then immediately regretted the question as she saw Vincent's expression tighten slightly. "Family troubles," he said simply, and his tone made it clear that he did not wish to elaborate. Rose understood that completely, given her own reasons for being alone in these mountains. They fell into silence again, but it was a more comfortable quiet this time, the kind that exists between two people who understand that some stories are not ready to be told. The stew filled the cabin with a rich, savory aroma that made Rose's mouth water, and when Vincent finally ladled generous portions into 2 tin bowls and brought them to the table, she had to restrain herself from falling upon the food like a starving animal. The first spoonful of hot stew was possibly the most delicious thing Rose had ever tasted, though she suspected that was more a function of her extreme hunger than any particular culinary skill on Vincent's part. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, while Vincent sat across from her and ate his own portion with the steady, mechanical efficiency of someone who viewed food as fuel rather than pleasure. "Thank you," Rose said when she had finished, setting down her spoon and meeting Vincent's eyes across the table. "For the food and the wood and this, all of it. I know I do not have any way to repay you right now, but I swear I will find a way." Vincent shook his head. "There is nothing to repay, Rose. But if it makes you feel better, you keeping this cabin maintained and having hot meals ready when I come home from work is payment enough. I meant what I said earlier about that being a fair arrangement." Rose nodded, feeling some of the weight of obligation lift from her shoulders. She could do that. She could maintain a home and prepare meals and make herself useful in exchange for the safety and security Vincent was providing. It was not charity if she was contributing her own labor to the arrangement. As the evening wore on, Rose found herself relaxing more and more in Vincent's presence. He was not effusively talkative, but neither was he cold or distant. He asked polite questions about her background, never pressing when she gave vague answers, and he shared small details about his own life and work at the ranch. He told her about the horses he tended and the cattle drives he had participated in, about the harsh winters and the beautiful springs when the mountains came alive with wildflowers. When full darkness had fallen and Rose could no longer suppress her yawns, Vincent insisted that she take the bed while he arranged blankets on the floor near the fireplace. Rose protested weakly, but she was so exhausted that she could barely form coherent arguments, and eventually she allowed herself to be persuaded. She lay in the unfamiliar bed, surrounded by the scent of wood smoke and pine, listening to the sound of Vincent's breathing across the room as he settled into his makeshift sleeping arrangement. She should have been terrified, should have been lying awake all night with her hand wrapped around a knife, prepared for the worst. But somehow, inexplicably, she felt safer than she had in months, maybe even years. As sleep finally claimed her, Rose's last conscious thought was a prayer of gratitude that she had found this man, this Vincent Morrison, chopping wood in her torn dress. No, that was not right. He had found her chopping wood and he had offered to do it for her. He had offered to keep her warm through the winter, to give her sanctuary in his cabin, to protect her from the harsh realities of surviving alone in the wilderness. She fell asleep with tears of relief tracking silently down her cheeks, soaking into the pillow that smelled faintly of leather and the outdoors. Rose woke the next morning to the sound of Vincent moving quietly around the cabin, trying not to disturb her. Pale sunlight streamed through the windows, and she could smell coffee brewing on the stove, the rich aroma pulling her more fully into consciousness. She sat up slowly, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, before the events of the previous day came flooding back. "Good morning," Vincent said when he noticed she was awake. "I am heading out to the ranch shortly, but I made coffee and there is bread and butter on the table for your breakfast. I should be back around sunset, maybe a bit later depending on what needs doing today." Rose pushed back the heavy blankets and stood, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance and torn dress. "What would you like me to do while you are gone?" Vincent paused in the act of pulling on his jacket, considering the question. "Whatever you feel comfortable doing. There is mending that needs attention, dishes to wash, and the fire will need tending throughout the day. But mostly, Rose, I want you to rest and recover. You look like you have been running on nothing but fear and determination for a while now, and that is not sustainable." He was right, of course, though Rose hated to admit it. She felt hollowed out, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness into something deeper and more fundamental. "I will take care of things here," she promised. "You do not have to worry." Vincent nodded, but before he left, he crossed to a trunk in the corner and pulled out a folded bundle of fabric. "These were my mother's clothes," he said, holding them out to Rose. "She passed away 2 years ago, and I have been carrying them with me because I could not bear to part with them. But I think she would want someone to get use out of them, and you need something better than that torn dress. You are welcome to whatever fits." Rose took the bundle with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the gesture and the trust it represented. "I cannot take your mother's clothes," she protested weakly. "Yes, you can," Vincent said firmly. "She was a practical woman who believed things should be used, not hoarded away for sentiment. Please, Rose, it would make me happy to see them being worn again." He left before she could formulate another protest, closing the door gently behind him and leaving Rose alone in the cabin with a bundle of clothes that smelled faintly of lavender and cedar. She unfolded them slowly, reverently, finding 2 simple dresses, a warm woolen shawl, stockings, and even a nightgown. They were well-made garments, cared for with obvious love, and the thought that Vincent was entrusting them to her made her throat tighten with emotion. Rose spent that first day exploring her new temporary home, learning where everything was kept and taking stock of the supplies available. Vincent had not been exaggerating about being well-stocked. The pantry held sacks of flour, sugar, and coffee, jars of preserved vegetables and fruits, dried beans and rice, salt pork and jerky. There was enough food to last 2 people through a harsh winter with careful rationing, which suggested that Vincent was both thoughtful and prepared. She changed out of her torn dress into one of the garments that had belonged to Vincent's mother. A simple brown wool dress that fit reasonably well with only minor adjustments needed. The feeling of clean fabric against her skin, fabric that was not torn or stained or falling apart, was almost overwhelming in its simple pleasure. The cabin itself was surprisingly tidy for a bachelor dwelling, suggesting that Vincent took pride in his living space and did not let it fall into disrepair. Rose found the promised mending, several shirts with torn seams and missing buttons, and she set about repairing them with thread and needle she found in a basket near the fireplace. The familiar motions of sewing were soothing, giving her hands something to do while her mind processed everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. She had gone from being utterly alone and terrified to having shelter, safety, and the protection of a man who seemed genuinely honorable. It felt too good to be true, and Rose kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Vincent to reveal his true intentions or demand payment of a more personal nature. But as the day wore on, and she remained unmolested and safe, some of her cynicism began to erode. When Vincent returned that evening, just as the sun was setting, he found the cabin warm and tidy, with a pot of beans and rice simmering on the stove. Rose had also managed to bake bread, though it was slightly lopsided and not quite as fluffy as she would have liked. She felt absurdly nervous presenting it to him, as if his opinion of her baking mattered more than it should. "This smells amazing," Vincent said, genuine appreciation in his voice as he hung up his hat and jacket. "You did not have to go to all this trouble, Rose." "It is not trouble," she replied, ladling beans onto 2 plates. "You said maintaining the home and preparing meals was part of our arrangement. I am just holding up my end." They ate together at the table, falling into an easy conversation about Vincent's day at the ranch and the work that needed doing before winter truly set in. He was a good storyteller, painting vivid pictures of ornery cattle and temperamental horses, and Rose found herself laughing for the first time in weeks at his descriptions of a particularly stubborn bull that had led the ranch hands on a chase through a creek. Over the following weeks, they settled into a comfortable routine. Vincent left each morning before dawn, heading to Copper Creek Ranch for long days of hard labor, and Rose spent her days maintaining the cabin, preparing meals, and slowly recovering from the ordeal of her flight and survival. She mended all of Vincent's clothes, organized the pantry, and even ventured outside to tend to the horses when the weather was mild enough. Vincent proved true to his word in every respect. He built a sleeping platform in the loft space within the first week, fashioning a simple but sturdy bed frame and stuffing a mattress with fresh straw and pine boughs. He never made any inappropriate advances, never gave Rose any reason to fear him, and maintained a respectful distance even as they grew more comfortable in each other's company. As November bled into December, the first serious snows began to fall, blanketing the mountains in white and driving the temperatures low enough that Rose could see her breath inside the cabin on particularly cold mornings. She was grateful beyond words for Vincent's solid walls and good stove. Remembering the abandoned cabin she had been trying to survive in and knowing she would have frozen to death by now if she had remained there. One evening, about 6 weeks after she had come to live in Vincent's cabin, Rose realized with a start that she had not thought about her Uncle Benjamin in days. The fear and revulsion that had driven her into the wilderness, that had haunted her dreams and made her flinch at shadows, had gradually faded into something more manageable. She was healing here, in this place with this man, finding peace and safety that allowed her to remember what it felt like to simply exist without constant terror. "You look thoughtful," Vincent observed from across the table where he was repairing a bridle that had come loose during the day's work. Rose looked up, meeting his eyes and feeling something shift in her chest. When had he become so familiar to her? When had his presence changed from merely tolerable to actively comforting? "I was just thinking about how different my life is now compared to 2 months ago," she admitted. "Different better, I hope?" Vincent asked, though there was a note of uncertainty in his voice that suggested he genuinely cared about her answer. "Different better," Rose confirmed, smiling softly. "So much better that it sometimes scares me. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for this to be revealed as too good to be true." Vincent set down the bridle, his expression serious and intent. "Rose, I want you to understand something. You are not a burden or an imposition. Having you here has made my life better too. I never realized how lonely I was until I had someone to come home to, someone to share meals with and talk to about my day. You have brought warmth to this cabin that has nothing to do with the fire in the hearth." Rose felt her breath catch at the raw honesty in his words. Over the past weeks, she had found herself noticing things about Vincent that had nothing to do with gratitude or practicality. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle way he handled the horses and spoke to them in low, soothing tones. The consideration he showed in 1,000 small ways, like always serving her first at meals or making sure the cabin was warm before he went to bed each night. She was developing feelings for him, Rose realized with a mixture of wonder and fear. real feelings that went beyond gratitude or dependence. She was falling in love with Vincent Morrison, this kind cowboy who had found her chopping wood in a torn dress and had offered to take care of her without expecting anything in return. "Vincent," she began hesitantly, not sure how to articulate what she was feeling. "I need to tell you something about why I was alone in those woods." He waited patiently, giving her time to gather her thoughts, and Rose found herself spilling the whole story. She told him about her parents dying when she was young, about going to live with her Uncle Benjamin, who had seemed kind at first, but had gradually become more controlling and inappropriate. She told him about the way his eyes had followed her, the way he had started finding excuses to touch her, the way he had made it clear that he expected repayment for his care in ways that made her skin crawl. "He never actually forced himself on me," Rose clarified, her voice shaking slightly at the memories. "But I could see it coming, could feel him working up to it. So I ran. I took the money I had saved from selling eggs at the market, and I just ran into the wilderness with no plan and no destination, just desperate to get away from him." Vincent's jaw had tightened progressively throughout her story, his hands clenching into fists on the table. But when he spoke, his voice was controlled and gentle. "Thank you for trusting me with that, Rose, and thank you for being brave enough to run, even though you had no idea what you were running toward. A lot of women in your situation would have felt they had no choice but to stay." "I could not stay," Rose whispered. "I would rather have died in those woods than let him touch me that way." "You will never have to go back to him," Vincent said fiercely. "I swear that to you, Rose. As long as I am alive, you will always have a place here, a safe place where no one can hurt you." The intensity of his promise, the protective fire in his eyes, made Rose's heart race. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why do you care so much about what happens to me? You barely know me." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, seeming to wrestle with something internal. Finally, he reached across the table and took her hand gently in his calloused palm warm against her skin. "Because from the moment I saw you standing there with that axe raised, dirty and torn and absolutely refusing to give up despite impossible odds, I knew you were someone special. Because every day since then has only confirmed that initial impression. Because you are kind and resilient, and you laugh at my terrible jokes even when they are not funny. Because having you here has made me feel less alone than I have felt since my mother died." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "And because somewhere along the way, Rose Mayfield, I fell in love with you, completely and irrevocably in love with you." Rose felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I do not know my last name is Mayfield," she whispered, and then realized how absurd that sounded given the much more important revelation he had just made. "I mean, yes, it is Mayfield, but I never told you that." "I guessed," Vincent admitted with a small smile. "There was mail for a Benjamin Mayfield at the general store in Willits, and when I asked around, people mentioned he had a niece named Rose who had disappeared about 2 months ago. I put the pieces together." "You investigated me?" Rose asked, though she found she was not angry, only curious. "I wanted to make sure you were not a wanted criminal or running from the law," Vincent said honestly. "But once I confirmed that you were exactly what you appeared to be, a young woman fleeing an impossible situation, I decided it was not my place to reveal your whereabouts to anyone unless you wanted me to." Rose squeezed his hand, marveling at the trust and respect he had shown her even when she had not asked for it. "I do not want to go back. Ever. As far as I am concerned, Rose Mayfield died in those woods, and someone new was born the day you found her chopping wood." "Then we will let Rose Mayfield rest in peace," Vincent said solemnly. "And the woman sitting before me can be whoever she wants to be." Rose stood, moving around the table without releasing Vincent's hand, and he rose to meet her, his eyes searching her face for permission or invitation. She gave it by stepping closer, closing the distance between them until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I love you too," she said, the words coming easier than she expected. "I think I started falling in love with you the day you chopped all that wood and asked for nothing in return. Every day since has only made it stronger." Vincent cupped her face gently with his free hand, his thumb brushing over her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. "May I kiss you, Rose?" "Please," she breathed, and then his lips were on hers, warm and soft and perfect. The kiss was everything a first kiss should be, gentle and exploratory, a question and answer all at once. Rose felt something inside her unfurl and bloom, some part of herself that had been locked away behind walls of fear and mistrust finally opening to the light. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, she rested her forehead against his chest and felt his arms come around her in an embrace that was protective without being confining. "I want this," she said firmly, needing him to understand. "I want you. But I am also scared because the only model I have for relationships between men and women is the twisted, horrible thing my uncle represented. I need you to be patient with me." "We have all the time in the world," Vincent assured her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "There is no rush, Rose. We will move at whatever pace feels right for you, and I will never push you beyond your comfort." They stood there in the middle of the cabin, wrapped in each other's arms as the fire crackled in the hearth and snow fell softly outside the windows. It was a moment of perfect peace, of two broken people finding wholeness in each other's presence. The winter passed in a blur of snowy days and cozy evenings, with Rose and Vincent growing ever closer as the weeks turned into months. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, sharing their histories and dreams and fears. Vincent told her about his childhood in Wyoming, about the father who had drunk himself to death, and the mother who had worked herself into an early grave trying to provide for her son. Rose shared memories of her parents before they died, happy times when she had felt loved and safe, and the future had seemed bright with possibility. They kissed often now, sweet stolen moments by the fire or when Vincent returned home from work, and gradually Rose's fear and mistrust faded entirely. Vincent never pushed for more than she was comfortable giving, content to let their physical relationship develop at her pace. It was a revelation to Rose that intimacy could be gentle and respectful. That desire did not have to be coupled with demands or coercion. Christmas came and went, marked by a simple celebration involving a roasted chicken, precious store-bought oranges that Vincent had acquired on a trip to town, and small handmade gifts. Rose had knitted Vincent a new scarf from wool she had unraveled from an old sweater and respun, and he had carved her a beautiful wooden comb inlaid with small pieces of polished stone. They exchanged these gifts with shy smiles, and Rose thought she had never felt wealthier than she did in that moment. As January turned to February, the worst of the winter began to break, though snow still covered the ground and temperatures remained cold. Vincent began talking about the spring, about the work that would need to be done at the ranch as calving season approached, and Rose found herself hoping desperately that he would ask her to stay beyond their original arrangement. She got her answer one evening in late February as they sat together on the bench Vincent had built near the fireplace, Rose tucked against his side with his arm around her shoulders. "Rose," Vincent began, his voice slightly nervous in a way she had rarely heard from him. "Spring is coming soon, and I know our original agreement was that you would stay here through the winter. But I am hoping, praying really, that you will consider making this arrangement permanent." Rose lifted her head from his shoulder to look at him, her heart pounding. "What are you asking, Vincent?" "I'm asking you to marry me," he said simply. "Not because of propriety or obligation or any reason other than the fact that I love you with everything I am, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it. I want to wake up next to you every morning and come home to you every evening. I want to build a life with you, have children with you if that is something you want, grow old watching the seasons change from the porch of this cabin. I want everything with you, Rose." Tears streamed down Rose's face as she threw her arms around his neck. "Yes," she sobbed. "Yes, I will marry you. I want all of those things too, Vincent. I want forever with you." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Rose felt the last of her walls crumble completely. She was safe here. She was loved here. She was home. They were married in early March in a simple ceremony at the small church in Willits, with the ranch owner Samuel Harper and his wife Martha standing as witnesses. Rose wore a new dress that Martha had helped her make from fabric Vincent purchased in town. A simple but elegant gown in deep blue that made her eyes shine. Vincent wore his best shirt and trousers, his hair freshly cut and his beard neatly trimmed, and Rose thought she had never seen a more handsome man. The ceremony itself was brief, but the vows they spoke to each other were heartfelt and genuine. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent kissed Rose with such tender devotion that several women in the small congregation sighed with romantic appreciation. They returned to the cabin that evening as the sun was setting, and for the first time, Rose climbed the ladder to the loft where Vincent had been sleeping for the past 4 months. He followed her up, and together they consummated their marriage with gentle passion, Vincent taking his time to ensure Rose's comfort and pleasure. It was nothing like the brutal, selfish act Rose had feared intimacy would be. It was beautiful and connecting, a physical expression of the love they had built over months of trust and companionship. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the narrow loft bed, Rose traced patterns on Vincent's chest and marveled at how drastically her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been chopping wood in a torn dress, desperate and terrified and utterly alone. Now she was married to the man she loved, safe and cherished and looking forward to a future filled with possibility. "What are you thinking?" Vincent asked, running his fingers through her auburn hair. "I was thinking about the day you found me," Rose admitted. "How I almost sent you away, how close I came to dying in those woods because I was too proud and afraid to accept help." "But you did not send me away," Vincent said. "You were brave enough to take a chance on a stranger, and that bravery brought you here to this moment to us." "No," Rose corrected gently. "You were brave enough to offer help to someone who probably looked half feral and entirely dangerous. You saw past the dirt and the torn dress and the raised axe to the person underneath who needed saving." "We saved each other," Vincent said, and Rose knew that was the truth. He had been lonely and adrift, going through the motions of life without real purpose or joy. She had given him something to care for, someone to protect and love and build a life with. Their meeting had been exactly what both of them needed, even if neither of them had known it at the time. Spring arrived in full force in April, transforming the mountains from white to green almost overnight. Wildflowers bloomed in riotous profusion, and the air filled with the songs of returning birds. Vincent's work at the ranch intensified with calving season, but he always made sure to return home each evening to his wife, no matter how tired he might be. Rose had transformed the cabin into a true home, adding small touches of comfort and beauty wherever she could. She planted a garden in a small, cleared space behind the cabin, coaxing vegetables and herbs from the rocky soil, and she began preserving foods for the next winter. Martha Harper had taken Rose under her wing, teaching her the skills she would need to thrive as a rancher's wife, and Rose had found in the older woman a surrogate mother and dear friend. In June, Rose realized she had missed her monthly courses for the second time in a row, and joy and terror warred in her heart in equal measure. She waited until she was certain before telling Vincent, choosing a quiet evening when they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Vincent, I have something to tell you," she began, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." The expression that crossed Vincent's face was one of pure, unfiltered elation. He pulled Rose into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time, and peppered her face with kisses. "A baby," he kept repeating. "We are going to have a baby." "Rose, you have made me the happiest man alive." "You are not frightened?" Rose asked, voicing her own fears. "Childbirth is dangerous, and I do not know anything about being a mother." "I am terrified," Vincent admitted honestly, "but I am also so excited I can barely contain it." "We will figure it out together, Rose, just like we have figured out everything else." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into fall, Rose's belly growing round and full as the baby developed within her. Vincent was attentive and protective to an almost comical degree, constantly worrying about her doing too much work or lifting things that were too heavy. Martha Harper visited often, bringing advice and supplies and reassurance when Rose's anxiety threatened to overwhelm her. In February of 1879, almost exactly 1 year after Vincent had proposed, Rose went into labor during a snowstorm. Martha had moved into the cabin a week prior in anticipation of the birth, and she proved invaluable as she coached Rose through the long, painful hours of bringing new life into the world. Vincent paced the cabin like a caged animal, unable to help or do anything useful, driving himself and everyone around him slightly crazy with his nervous energy. But when Martha finally emerged from behind the curtain, they had rigged around the bed and announced, "You have a son, Vincent." His face transformed with wonder. Rose lay exhausted but triumphant in the bed, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets, and when Vincent approached with tears streaming down his face, she held out their son for him to hold. The baby was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were still the cloudy blue of all newborns but would likely turn brown like his father's. "Hello, little one," Vincent whispered, holding his son with infinite care as if the baby were made of spun glass. "Welcome to the world. Your mother and I have been waiting to meet you." They named him Thomas William Morrison, Thomas after the old man whose abandoned cabin had inadvertently brought Rose and Vincent together, and William after Vincent's father who had died too young. Little Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong, and he thrived under the devoted care of his parents. Rose discovered that motherhood came more naturally to her than she had feared, some instinct guiding her through the challenges of nursing and soothing and the sleepless nights. Vincent was a devoted father, always eager to hold his son or change his diaper or simply watch him sleep with an expression of such profound love that it made Rose's heart ache. As Thomas grew from infant to baby to toddler, Rose and Vincent's life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Vincent continued working at Copper Creek Ranch, eventually being promoted to head ranch hand with a corresponding increase in pay that allowed them to make improvements to their cabin and put aside savings for the future. Rose managed their home and garden, raised their son, and found deep satisfaction in the simple life they had built together. When Thomas was 2 years old, Rose found herself pregnant again, and this time she was less frightened and more simply excited to expand their family. Their second child, a daughter they named Violet Rose Morrison, arrived in the spring of 1882, and she completed their family in a way Rose had not known was possible. The years passed peacefully, marked by the changing seasons and the slow growth of their children. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved animals and could often be found following his father around the ranch when Vincent brought him to work. Violet was fierce and independent from the moment she could walk, with her mother's red hair and her father's determination. In 1885, when Rose was helping Violet learn to chop wood in the clearing behind their cabin, using a small hatchet Vincent had made especially for the purpose, she looked up to see her husband watching them with that same expression of love and wonder he had worn on the day they met. "What is it?" Rose asked, straightening up and brushing sawdust from her skirt. "I was just remembering the first time I saw you chopping wood," Vincent said, crossing the clearing to pull her into his arms. "Standing there in that torn dress, looking like you would fight the whole world if you had to. I fell a little bit in love with you right then, you know, even before I knew your name." Rose smiled up at him, seeing the gray beginning to thread through his dark hair and the lines forming around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. They were getting older, both of them, but the love between them had only grown stronger and deeper with each passing year. "And I fell in love with you when you said, 'Let me chop. You just warm my cabin forever,'" Rose replied, though those had not been his exact words. But the sentiment had been there, the offer to take care of her and protect her and give her a home. "Best decision I ever made was trusting you that day." "Second best decision," Vincent corrected. "The best was agreeing to marry me. Papa, are you and Mama going to kiss again?" Violet asked with the exasperation of a 3-year-old who found her parents' affection both embarrassing and inevitable. "Probably," Vincent said cheerfully, and proceeded to do exactly that, dipping Rose dramatically while she laughed and their daughter groaned, and Thomas, watching from the porch, just shook his head with the long-suffering patience of a 5-year-old brother. The years continued to roll past, bringing both joys and challenges as all years do. The children grew and changed, Thomas eventually following his father into ranch work and Violet proving to have a gift with horses that led to her becoming a sought-after trainer. Rose and Vincent grew older together, their love deepening into something profound and unshakable, a foundation upon which their entire life was built. In 1895, when Rose was 35 years old and Vincent was 37, they sat together on the porch of their cabin, now expanded to twice its original size, watching the sunset and reflecting on the 17 years they had spent together. "You ever regret it?" Vincent asked, breaking a comfortable silence. "Running away that day, ending up in these mountains, building this life?" Rose looked at him as if he had sprouted a second head. "Regret meeting you, having our children, building this home and this life?" "Vincent Morrison, that might be the most ridiculous question you have ever asked me." He smiled, the expression still capable of making her heart flutter even after all these years. "I just want to make sure you are happy, Rose. That has been my goal every day since you agreed to let me chop that wood for you." "I am happy," Rose said firmly, taking his hand and intertwining their fingers. "I am so deeply, profoundly happy that sometimes I still cannot quite believe this is my life. You saved me, Vincent. Not just from the physical danger of dying in those woods, but from the belief that I was worthless and that no one could ever truly love me for who I am." "You saved me right back," Vincent reminded her. "I was just going through the motions before you came along. You gave me purpose and joy and a family to love." Everything good in my life started the day I found you chopping wood in that torn dress." They sat together as the sun disappeared below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Inside the cabin, they could hear Thomas and Violet arguing good-naturedly about something, their voices carrying through the open windows along with the warm glow of lamplight. Rose thought about the terrified girl she had been 17 years ago, chopping wood with blistered hands, and no idea how she would survive the coming winter. That girl had been broken and afraid, convinced that the world was a cruel place where kindness always came with strings attached. But then a cowboy on a gray horse had ridden into her life and proven that there were still good people in the world, people who helped simply because it was the right thing to do. That chance encounter in the woods outside Willits, California, had changed everything. It had given Rose a home and a family, and a love that sustained her through every challenge life threw their way. It had given Vincent someone to care for and protect, a purpose beyond simply surviving from one day to the next. "I love you," Rose said, the words as easy and natural as breathing after 17 years of speaking them. "I love you too," Vincent replied, pulling her close and pressing a kiss to her temple. "Forever and always, Rose. You just keep warming this cabin and my heart, and I will keep chopping wood and loving you until the day I die." Rose smiled against his shoulder, recognizing the echo of that first day in his words. He had offered to chop wood while she warmed his cabin, and she had been doing exactly that for 17 years now. But it was so much more than a simple transaction or arrangement. It was a partnership built on mutual respect and deep, abiding love. As the years continued to pass, Rose and Vincent grew old together in their cabin in the California mountains. They welcomed grandchildren into their lives as Thomas and Violet married and started families of their own. They celebrated anniversaries and holidays surrounded by the family they had built, and they never took for granted the miracle of finding each other against all odds. In the winter of 1920, when Rose was 60 years old and Vincent was 62, they sat together by the fire in the cabin that had been their home for over 40 years. Age had slowed them both, adding silver to their hair and lines to their faces, but the love in their eyes when they looked at each other was as bright and strong as it had been on their wedding day. "You remember the day we met?" Rose asked, though she knew Vincent remembered it as clearly as she did. "Every detail," Vincent confirmed. "You were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, even covered in dirt and swinging that axe like you meant to kill someone with it." Rose laughed, the sound a bit raspier than it had been in her youth but still full of genuine joy. "I was so frightened that day, frightened and exhausted and certain I was going to die alone in those woods." "But you did not die," Vincent said, reaching over to take her hand, his grip still strong despite the arthritis that plagued his fingers. "You lived and thrived and built something beautiful. We built something beautiful together." "We did," Rose agreed, looking around the cabin that held 40 years of memories. "We really did, Vincent." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire dance and listening to the wind howl outside the windows, and Rose reflected on the extraordinary journey her life had taken. She had started as a frightened, abandoned girl with nothing but her determination to survive. She had become a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a beloved member of the community, all because a kind cowboy had seen past her dirt and desperation to the person underneath who deserved saving. Their love story had started with an axe and a torn dress, with an offer to chop wood in exchange for nothing more than the warmth of a shared home. It had grown into something extraordinary, a bond so strong that it had weathered every storm life threw at them and emerged even stronger on the other side. Thomas and his family lived just a mile away now, having built their own home on land Vincent had purchased and divided among his children. Violet and her husband had moved to a larger town to pursue her horse training business, but they visited regularly with their own children, filling the cabin with noise and laughter and life. Rose thought about all the years of joy and love, the challenges they had overcome together, the quiet moments of connection that had sustained them through difficult times. She thought about the children they had raised and the legacy they would leave behind, a legacy of love and kindness, and the understanding that helping someone in need was never wasted effort. In the spring of 1922, Vincent passed away peacefully in his sleep, his hand held in Rose's as he had held hers so many times over the decades. Rose grieved deeply, mourning the loss of her partner and soulmate, but she also felt profound gratitude for the 44 years they had been granted together. Not everyone got a love like theirs, a love that started with a simple act of kindness and grew into something that sustained them through a lifetime. Rose lived for another 8 years after Vincent's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and when she finally passed away in the winter of 1930 at the age of 70, she died with a smile on her face. Her last words were about Vincent, about the day he had found her chopping wood and had offered to help without expecting anything in return. Their children buried them side by side on a hill overlooking the cabin they had shared for so many years, with a simple headstone that read, Vincent and Rose Morrison. They found each other in the wilderness and built a love that lasted forever. The cabin stood for many more years, eventually becoming a cherished family gathering place where subsequent generations would come to hear the story of their remarkable ancestors. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would sit on the porch that Vincent had built and listen to the tale of how their family began with a cowboy offering to chop wood for a desperate woman in a torn dress. The story became family legend, passed down through the generations as an example of what true love looked like. It was a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary things in life started with the simplest acts of kindness, and that being willing to help someone without expecting anything in return could change the course of 2 lives forever. And so the legacy of Rose and Vincent Morrison lived on, not just in the descendants who carried their blood and their names, but in the values they had exemplified throughout their lives. They had built something beautiful and lasting from the most unlikely beginning, and their love story became a beacon of hope for everyone who heard it, proof that even in the harshest wilderness, with nothing but determination and trust, 2 people could find each other and create something extraordinary that would echo through time long after they were gone.